Hi, everybody, and welcome to Neuroscientists Talk Shop, UTSA's Neuroscience Research Podcast. Today is April 16th, and we're talking with Dr. Robert Froemke, who is professor in the Department of Otolaryngology and the Department of Neuroscience at New York University Langone Health. His lab has studied a range of topics, including, for example, processing of sound by the auditory system, synaptic plasticity, and today's topic, which is parental behavior in mice and the role of oxytocin as a hypothalamic hormone that regulates that. Also hypothalamic hormone / transmitter, I think, because a lot of it is neuron to neuron communication. So welcome, Robert.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on here.
Also with us is Alice Bertero, Alfonso Apicella,
Hi.
and John Muller.
Howdy.
And they are auditory systems neurophysiologists here with us. And Alice, and Alfonso are podcast veterans. Welcome back.
Thank you.
John, have you been on before?
One time.
One time. Okay, well, welcome back to you too.
Thank you.
And I'm Charlie Wilson. So, Robert, your colleague, Dayu Lin, was here just a few weeks ago. I know you know her. And she told us about a bunch of places in the hypothalamus that when stimulated triggered some kind of parental behavior. Usually it was aggressive protection of the nest.
Mm-hmm.
And these places in the hypothalamus were occupied by little clusters of neurons, and they were relatively small spots. And you get into that spot and stimulate it, and you will get that behavior full-blown triggered. And if you block those neurons from firing, you can't get that. The animal simply won't do that.
Yeah, it's amazing work.
Amazing. So it gives you the idea of this kind of a keyboard of innate behaviors, and she called them innate behaviors, and you punch that key and you get that behavior, punch this key. And, how does the behavior get generated? How does the sequence of muscle movements get made? And fighting is not all that simple because you can't just fight. You have to watch what the other mouse is doing and adjust to that. So it's fairly complicated, but to execute it, but just the executive decision, this is what should be done, seemed like it was there and not too much need to be learned. I suppose you need to learn how to fight. That's more generic. So your work is also on parental behavior, but it's focused on the more nurturing side of behavior, like pup retrieval, building nests, and taking care, keeping the pups warm, that kind of stuff. And those seem to require a lot of learned things, even learning to recognize your pup's distress call. And this brings in the sort of auditory side of it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And
that was my inroad to it too. I was an auditory neurophysiologist who got interested in responses to specific signals. And now I sort of have a program on parental behavior research, but it came
at first it was just learning to detect your pups.
Yep.
So it seems like there's so many extreme skills required of a mouse mom. And what are they? Because we don't know. We don't watch mice parenting. Most of us, you do.
It's a living.
No, we don't.
The more we watch, the kind of more we learn. That's sort of the principle, I think, of like documentary filmmaking, right? If you watch Blue Planet on BBC, it takes a whole lot of video to discover, one little interesting behavior these animals do. I do want to say, Dayu and I are colleagues here at NYU. We sort of run now a new facility together, building larger habitats. Her interest is in territory and competition as a function maybe of aggression, whereas I'm interested in cooperation and co-parenting. But we work together on this. We manage a similar team of people. It's been really marvelous work on this with her. And part of it is we have different perspectives on sort of just how innate are different behaviors. So what is innate and what is learned is a huge question, right? I mean, that's kind of what's captured in the phrase like nature versus nurture. Without a doubt, there are some aspects of parenting or just human existence and animal life that sort of have to be innate. We all can hear a baby cry, and have a response to that cry. And by response, I mean a feeling. It's generally a kind of obnoxious signal, especially if we hear it on an airplane and we're trying to sleep. We might feel differently as a parent, but we definitely have different behaviors. I mean, being a parent is actually sort of about kind of this construction of a whole set of behaviors with different scales, some immediate, some longer term, comforting a baby versus saving for college tuition for 10 years from now, right? And so our brains need to operate in all of those scales to effectively take care of our young. That's true for mice also, right? And so it's different than, I think, in some regard, from these VMHVL neurons that Dayu is sort of famous for, where you stimulate them and you get these attack patterns. Even her work indicates there is some learning in kind of the very kind of short time scale, conspecific aggression that comes about from that. But we believe that mice can hear the cries their babies make. Mouse pups make cries for the same reason, really, that human babies do. They're cold, they're upset, they're hungry. And just like with human parents, the mouse parents use those signals to assess the state of their animal and operate in such a way to basically change the baby cry. A lot of, human comforting behavior by a caretaker, a mother or father, is basically designed to turn those cries into laughs, right? Or just to calm the child and have it go back to sleep. Mice do similar things. I mean, there are really important differences between being a mouse parent and being a human parent. I don't build a nest made of cotton balls. I don't pick up my pup with, my mouth and stuff. But a lot of the goals are pretty much the same. I think they have to be, just because the real goal is survival. Survival of these specific creatures, and kind of writ large, survival of the species. One of the amazing things about it is you don't have a lot of time to kind of get it right. Kids can't provide for themselves. Someone has to feed them. Someone has to clothe them. A little neonate can't do any of that. And so the parents sort of have to kind of always be on the job. And so that's kind of one thing that I think is a feature of our work, is that parenting is really all about co-parenting and social support. And it's extremely challenging, even for a lab mouse in a lab environment, to be a single parent, and that the risks of infant mortality are still quite high. And yet there's another adult in there. There are interactions between those adults that change the behavior of both those animals and then lead to some kind of more or less cooperative pattern of co-caring. And so what we're really trying to do is just put a camera on that, quite literally, and watch that happen, and then combine that with neural recordings from oxytocin neurons from the auditory system to really understand what are the neural adaptations that have to occur. Because an animal might have one baby, it might have 10 babies. There might be 2 other animals in the environment, there might be 10 other animals in the environment. These animals might live in a barn, they might live underground, there might rain, there might be a forest fire. There might not be food during winter. So, of course, then lots of neural systems need to come into play, and learning has to be part of it. There's kind of an online learning that's kind of probably really difficult to kind of understand. For example, how do animals map their environment, locate food sources? When those food sources dry up, what do they do? What is effective nest building material? How do animals sense temperature? And then there are things that are kind of more straightforward. We've measured this infant mouse is crying. We see this caretaker come on over and move it back to the nest and sit on top of it. And so measuring the neural activity in those cases is kind of much more straightforward, because it's this kind of, fairly well-described little pattern of behavior. And we kind of know some parts of what brain areas are involved. Oxytocin is this amazing hormone that is fundamentally important in mammals, maternal physiology, for nursing and for contractions during birthing. But it also has a whole bunch of functions in the brain that enable these behaviors to come online. One important thing is that oxytocin actually predates mammals. Oxytocin is evolutionarily ancient. Worms and octopus and reptiles and birds all have versions of oxytocin. And none of these animals nurse their young, right? So oxytocin was sort of later co-opted to be part of the mechanism by which mammals feed their young. And I think that fundamentally, where the direction of the research and the whole field is kind of taking us is that oxytocin is sort of involved in calibrating around social environments, attending to social scenes, understanding who's in your in-group and who's in your out-group, who can you look to for social support, when do you need to provide social support, and then it makes sense then that this molecule might be involved in a form of mammalian maternal care that really just absolutely requires social support for it to be successful. I mean, that's even true nowadays where, most people give birth in the context of a hospital. Many people have a lactation consultant. Very few people are truly single parenting out in the wild. There are schools, there are babysitters, there are grandparents, there are nannies, friends. If you're a parent, kind of anybody you can look to help watch your kid, it can be very helpful, right? So, and we're interested in kind of all of that.
So you've seen how mother mouse will persuade another female mouse to help her out. And could you tell us about that? Because it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So a mother animal will attend to another adult in her vicinity and basically go on over and push that other animal into the nest. More or less to basically be a warm blanket to keep her babies warm while the mother is able to go out and forage or find nest building material or even just calm down from bouts of nursing. Nursing is metabolically really demanding, and animals will overheat. The mother animal can't just be on the nest the whole time. So she has to leave, and in if you will, the real world, she has to go find food to bring back to her babies. So the parental experience for, I would say, most mammals is kind of maps onto the human experience in some way, that you're kind of ping-ponging between the things you have to do for yourself, the things that you have to do then for other people. It's self-care, go to work, go back home, take care of the babies, check on them, go to sleep, wake up in the middle of the night, go check on your kids. I really don't think of parenting behaviors as these kind of punctate behaviors where this neuron population activates this parental program. I really do think from all of this work, not just from my lab, but from lots of other amazing people in the field, including Dayu, that parenting is just this state one gets in that then kind of changes the calibration around these amazing little initially helpless critters that you're going to devote yourself to. And kind of once you're a parent, you're never not a parent again. I do want to say though that parenting is distributional. That is to say, the peripartum experience for everybody, the birthing parent, the family, is just different and individual, and oftentimes complicated, most of the time very messy. And so, there's, I think an aspirational kind of parenting involving keeping our kids happy and warm in this loving environment. And then there's the real life of parenting, which is yelling at your kids to pick up their stuff and various peripartum conditions that get expressed that have impact on family life. I think it's important, as someone working in the field, to have some clarity around that and the importance of the research and the need, first of all, for just an understanding of the ranges of experience people have and thus the kinds of support that might need to be provided. Not just sort of marveling at when it goes well, but really trying to understand and sort of situate the times when it kind of, sort of less than perfect.
I have a question about that, correct. The environment that you are using for these mice is kind of small. It's has to be in a room like that, where more or less we feel safe. What happens if you try to study this type of behavior in a larger room, and what is the risk that a mother is willing to take when, for example, think about that we have right now a space like this, and there is only one pup there, and I have 10 here, and vice versa.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. It's really driving this work that Dayu and I are doing now, because I care a lot about that, and I do worry that, as I hope everyone who's a scientist kind of worries, that the mechanisms, the interesting behaviors, the things you've identified, how special case are they? How tailored are they to exactly the conditions of this environment? And if you were to make the cage this much bigger, put in one more animal, or like drop the temperature, it totally all goes out the window. So, and that's the thing also that makes parenting so rich as well as challenging to work on as a scientist. It has to be flexible. No one's home is static. Even like a lab vivarium has people coming in and out. Maybe electricians have to come in and fix the lights. Different grad students come in and out. The animals get moved to a different room. Those are fairly minor compared to like weather and, changes in temperature and the sudden influx of like a new predator and that kind of thing that animals have to deal with in order to survive. Some of the most amazing work in this whole field comes from Barbara Koenig in Switzerland. She recently retired from her academic job, but for decades she had a farmhouse kind of just in the foot of the Alps. And there were hundreds of mice, house mice, that just lived in this barn. And the focus of her research was really just understanding, what are these mice doing? How do they live their lives? She tried to radio chip as many as she could. She put cameras in the barn and looked at patterns of parenting, patterns of behavior, patterns of foraging. There's not a lot of other work like this. In very different species, in whales, just actually like a week or so ago, there was a report of other whales, some related, some unrelated, forming a circle around a birthing whale mom, some of them seeming to interact with the mom to kind of help with the birthing process. I made the New York Times. It's amazing behavior. How long do you have to sit in a boat in the ocean in the hopes of like capturing that, right? We know very little about how mice give birth in the wild. We know very little about how actually any species does that, with the exception of humans. There are wonderful, rich descriptions of animal behavior along lots of different avenues, including like mouse colonies and their foraging patterns and their territory. I think there's a good reason why we don't know that much about how they give birth and take care of their babies. It's the most vulnerable point in an animal's life. And so if they're just out in the field giving birth where like a field observer could just watch them and document them, a predator is definitely going to come on by, especially if they have to be there for hours or days because they have these little neonates. There have been times when documentary filmmakers have gotten like a camera in like the cave that a birthing snake mother moves into, and she'll be there like for a whole year. And they just collect video for a year of the snake. Even this whale study, as remarkable as it is sort of a one-off. What makes work in mice a little bit different is mice they're the workhorse of most biomedical research. And so we can just document the statistics of things in a way it's really hard to do like in the wild. So the question about like how does the environment change things, what we need to do is have sort of a flexible system where we can kind of control the parameters. And really what we need is sort of institutional level support for data collection to be able to video as much as we can to house those data, to share those data, because not everyone is going to be able to have petabyte level servers, and we don't need to if we can share the data better, right? Not everybody has to make their own podcast. They go on YouTube and look up some stuff to kind of, get a sense as to what's going on in the scientific world, right? So the more you can like collect video and share videos, the better, right? So NYU has been really supportive of the projects that Dai and I do by providing this kind of infrastructure for us. And now it's our job to kind of build, if you will, mesoscale terrariums where we can ask about, okay, what if there is the threat of predation? What if there is some weather? What if we have two families who are unrelated? Under what conditions do they work together? If resources are rich, maybe they are kind of one big happy family. What happens if we shrink the territory or food supply goes down? How do they then navigate that? When do we get really intra and intergroup aggression versus cooperation? Yeah. And because, just to complete the thought, yes. Sorry, because it's mice, we can do the statistics on this and look for patterns in a way it's really difficult to do with other species, except maybe humans. Sorry.
No. Another critical moment is not only when there is a predator, correct? But I think as a parent is when you sleep. And there is also a study that showed that oxytocin, it's important for sleep, not like melatonin. But how is the role then when we are asleep, correct? And I don't know, there is difference. I know I don't want to bring that, but between mom and dad, because at least in my family, my wife looks like that she was more alert to hear this calling compared to me.
So
maybe I was
my family
ignoring on purpose. I don't know.
In my family, it's the other way around. Okay. I actually really bad hearing loss. I have bilateral 40 dB hearing loss. We live in this Manhattan apartment, so the air conditioner is on, and if the babies are crying, I'm the one who's first to wake up. I mean, maybe it's because it's actually the thing I work on. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm good at it. I kind of feel it is just, I understand the consequences if no one is there. But like for whatever reason, I'm like really sensitive to the cries of my own children. Every family is different. I think the most important thing is that however it goes, there's a negotiation, oftentimes implicit, sometimes explicit, to kind of work this out. And that's definitely dynamic, right? Because as the pups or the babies are no longer babies, the demands required of them change, the demands of the parents change. And so there's kind of a constant kind of need for a dialogue. And one thing we're sort of interested in discovering is there some kind of communication channel in non-human species for this? And I don't mean like language, but if, the demands of childcare do change, and one parent might sense that first, how could that be transmitted so that both parents continue to kind of be effective? Or it doesn't have to be two parents if these animals are in a colony. Is there some kind of logic to colony dynamics? Now, how fixed is that versus how flexible that is? I think that's another reason why I think that this isn't a set of innate behaviors, is just because it has to be so flexible and dynamic over multiple timescales and in different kinds of spatial environments, including just physical environmental variables. But I can't imagine if what is meant by innate behavior is some genes that lead to specific neural structures being formed that lead to specific behaviors, that all of that behavioral adaptation, flexibility, all of that algorithmic complexity is just fully genetically specified. It can't be, right? Like, we know from lots of work in animals and humans that you have to build a physics model. And you build that physics model by like bumping into walls. Learning how to walk is really complicated. Is that an innate behavior? The drive might be innate, but the behavior is highly learned through experience. Picking up a cup and putting it down takes an infant, a toddler, months to master. Even at age 3 and 4, right, our kids are still sloshing cups all over the place. And that's just as simple as you can imagine picking up a cup. And so if that is not innate, I just can't imagine trying to like figure out where to go to the grocery store, or how to navigate, the fox in the neighborhood to get some, corn pellets or something. I can't see how it's innate.
So a great thing about working with mice instead of people or whales or something like that is you can be recording the neurons and try to unravel some of the mystery that surrounds that. So I was, to get back to what you were talking about, the community aspect, then you can be recording from the female mouse that's being recruited to help the mother out and see what's happening in the brain of the female mouse as she's realizing what's needed. And she starts to cooperate. I guess at first they're not very cooperative, and then they gradually change, and something is happening then. And you know something about it. So I think that's fascinating. Mm-hmm. What's happening in that female mouse's brain?
So one thing that's become really clear in the last decade or so is that brains are quite good at what's sort of called now one-shot learning. So, of course, as humans, this is how we experience the world. You meet someone, you learn their name. In some cases, you will never forget it. You don't have to kind of keep being reintroduced to it. Language itself is really also complicated. It's more complicated than picking up a cup. Kids sit there and practice talking, and it takes them a long time to master all of that. Sometimes we never quite get there, right? But in terms of the neural adaptations, the neuroplasticity, the brain changes lead to behavioral changes. they can be very fast. So I actually never touched a baby until our first kid was born. So I'd never changed a diaper. And then the night our first child was born, the nurse put the diaper on. And me being a practicing scientist, I have like a process for this, right? You know, you watch one, you know, you do one, you teach one, right? So like, I had to learn how to do this. And so I had the nurse take it off, and then I put it on with her instruction, and I messed it up. And then I tried again and got it right. I'm going to assert that since that night, I'm 100% on diaper changing, right? If you were to assay my behavior in snapshots, I go from 0% diaper changing skill to 100% diaper changing skill from day 0 to day 1. That doesn't mean I have a diaper changing circuit that was magically unlocked by the sale of a baby or something. That's silly, right? That means that we have the capacity to do very rapid learning, right? And there's wonderful work starting in the hippocampus. It's work of Katie Bittner working with Jeff McGee, showing that in hippocampus you can get these beautiful representations of space from one trial to the next. Just no response at all to a certain place as an animal experiences or explores an environment, and then boom, these neurons start responding. Beautiful work. And that paper came out kind of right before the current era of machine learning and like deep neural nets and all the craziness that's led to. And you know, a lot of interest there is how quickly can you train a network to do something. So there's a lot of interest in kind of applications of mechanisms for reinforcement learning and one-shot learning. I believe absolutely other mammalian species, maybe any species, can do one-shot learning because you don't have that many opportunities to realize that looming stimulus is a predator that will eat you, right? Or that like, you know, that food source you went to is actually highly toxic. And that if you survive it, you'll never go there again, right? You don't need to keep sampling it over and over again and kind of slowly build a representation. There are some things that are like that, like learning how to speak, learning how to swing a bat, involves very slow motor learning. But there are other aspects of life that are, boom, you're there, you've learned. And I think that really just, you know, how quickly offspring will perish in the absence of parental care requires that some things at least are learned very quickly like that. So, and I also kind of think from the perspective of this work that like anybody can be a great caretaker. Humans are a little bit privileged in that anyone can go to the store and get like a bottle of milk or some formula or something. Mammals don't necessarily have that opportunity. The lactating mother does have sort of a privilege there in terms of the importance of family life and, if you will, kind of the job that she plays. But even in mouse colonies, right, males, females, related or unrelated, they can all kind of help out. That really is also, you know, one of the results from Barbara Koenig's work in this farm in Switzerland, that like unrelated mice would work together to care for a population of young infants. One interesting thing that happened there, one terrifying thing, is that a few years ago, a polecat got into the barn and devastated the mouse population. Something on the order of a third of the population was just wiped out by this one kind of like apocalyptic COVID-like event, right? And then they kind of looked at how quickly social networks were formed, how quickly could animals even like find each other, kind of regenerate families and that kind of thing. It's amazing stuff, right? So, you know, I think that there are natural experiments, and I think the kind of newer attempts with documentary filmmaking to just put cameras places and watch things happen really shows that like some things can kind of come online quite quickly. And so then, and only then, is it possible to put electrodes in the brain and measure these things. Because you first have to just believe it's going to work before you start installing lots of kind of technical hardware to measure neural activity. And then you start to see a lot of interesting things happen in the brain. Oxytocin starts being released, other neurochemical systems become activated, responses to baby cries become reformulated, the dynamics by which neural activity is propagated from one area to the next get kind of reformed. And I think one advantage also of working on parenting is that there are sort of clear behavioral manifestations of these things. And so it's sort of then a little bit more straightforward to assign meaning of the neural activity to what's going on in the behavior. They're like long-term planning and decision-making, or even like the recognition of like what a chair is. It's actually quite complicated. So very highly individual specific. And we all largely agree what a chair is semantically, but we actually, if we were all to draw one in this room, there'd be differences between what it is, right? Based on our past experience. And so the kind of the structure of family life kind of allows us, it's a little more straightforward to kind of see behaviors play out and then kind of assign, was this successful or not? If an animal's digging in some way, it's hard to know if that animal, does that have some kind of disorder? Or is it just digging for fun? You can't ask the animal. So you have to have kind of observable outcomes that let you infer the meaning and the reason, if you will, of what the animal did.
Another interesting aspect of parenting, correct, that we have to learn when is the right time that the pups are leaving the nest, correct? And
now we're talking about our own experience.
Correct. Have you seen anything like that, correct? When they know that the pups are ready to go and when they're ready to do parenting at distance, correct?
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a difference, I think, between when the parent might think the pup is ready and when the pup thinks the pup is ready.
I've been there.
This is the heart of parenting, everybody. So, one fun thing about all of this work is that, like, by collecting a ton of video, and there's just, there's lots, it really sort of opens the door to scientific discovery in a broader population. There aren't a lot of people who can, like, get the hardware to, like, do neural recordings. For example, or by analogy, if you want to discover something about, like, the early universe, there aren't a lot of people who can just go set up a huge telescope in their home for like $50 and like make brand new discoveries, right? There aren't a lot of people who can afford, massive lasers and electron microscopes and neural recording amplifiers and do this stuff. But video is different. You just put a camera on something and collect data, and people can watch those data, and you can still to this day discover brand new things about how animals, like, explore their world and change and grow. I think one thing we're really interested in doing is, I was talking about essentially like trying to figure out if an animal does something, what led to that behavioral change in the first place. Sort of what is sort of action at a distance, if you will, in terms of like brains and behavior. Are there early outcomes that lead to changes in behavior way late in life? I think we all have experience of like some memory of childhood or something very brief in terms of the full statistics of our lives. It could have just been a few seconds. Something as traumatic as like a car accident, something as wonderful as like, people applauded you at this birthday party or whatever, just some little event in your childhood that has some long-term outcomes. But like two people nominally who have the same kind of, background begin to diverge. We're all so different and special, and why? Where do those bifurcations happen? Video, if you just put enough video cameras, you can capture everything everyone does. And people might have wonderful, rich internal states. Of course we do. Mice do too, probably. But there's part of that which will sort of always be, or almost always certainly be, unknowable. But if that internal state never manifests in terms of actual behavior, then did it really matter? Like if I'm thinking really hard about being a good parent, but I'm just like not really ever at home, am I really a good parent? What's more important, the feeling and the intent, or the actual behavioral operation, right? So video is life. Video is a very special medium in this capacity. And also, our lab and other labs have been able to archive videos And there are high school students trying to get experience with lab work to make decisions about, do they want to be a scientist? Do they want to go to college in STEM? There are undergrads who want to get into medical school and want some experience also with research. Not everyone can, build the Hubble telescope. Not everyone can build a 2-photon microscope. Not everyone can patch in vivo, but anybody can look at video and just sit there long enough. If you sit by the river long enough, you will see interesting things flow down it. And that's actually all this work that we're talking about. That literally is the case. We've had high school students, we've had undergraduates come in the lab and just sit and make major discoveries. This thing about the mom pushing the other animal into the nest, that was the discovery of 2 undergrads in the lab, just from this video archive that we had collected. And there's still many more things to be discovered there. So it's a very kind of, accessible aspect of the science.
And on that, so basically all the behavioral analysis or the core of that is made by humans. You mentioned the importance of looking at the thing because we're not at the stage where we can discover with computer science and not just a deep lab cat or other things. So how much is that in your research? How much you use that kind of resources and how much you rely on people, trained or untrained? Because sometimes it's better if you don't know what you're looking for. No?
Yeah. It's a good question. So, so you asked about, do we see anything in terms of like leaving the nest and stuff? So that's where all this came from. For the first 10 days or so, the pups are basically just infants. They're just little wriggly things. They get fed by the mom. But you have to kind of watch 10 days of video to really assert that, right? Like, the amazing thing about life isn't necessarily sleep and wake and kind of the statistical regularities. It's those little blips, right? That make life so interesting and individual. So you really do have to watch the video to get a sense of that. What we discovered is that they start watching at day 12 and 14, then the infant mouse becomes a little toddler and starts following mom around and copying her behaviors. She goes to get a drink of water, the pup follows her. She investigates this food source. The pup does it too. And then we have instances on video where the mom remembers she has other babies, goes back to the nest, and the pup almost like jumps in surprise, realizing the mom is gone, and scurries on back to be with mom again, right? That transition from like infancy to toddlerhood is marvelous. And then there's another stage later on where the animals start exploring more on their own. And there might be some drive to do that too, but then it's sort of, elaborated by the experiences which animals have. And so what this medium kind of gives us the possibility to do is sort of unroll the tape, look and ask like, what sorts of early experiences or late experiences lead to strategies, algorithms, one's own PTSD or conception of the world. So it's a back and forth with like looking by eye and people watching and being able to use modern approaches of inference and machine learning to really help us do that. Because 10 days of video, if this video were 10 days long, who would want to watch that, right? So like 10 days, that's 10 days of someone's life. So, and if we care about statistics, that means we have to do that 10 times, 100 times. How many people do you have to survey to get a sense as to like, is some gene a risk factor for lung cancer or whatever? The numbers have to be high. So we're kind of in constant dialogue. This is a very fast-moving field, and what was impossible a few years ago is suddenly, everyone's doing it. I mean, my background is in computer science. I went to a self-driving car contest in the early 90s and like nothing. I mean, in the early mid-90s, the current conception of machine learning was thought to be science fiction. And it still blows my mind. You could pull out a smartphone and do like instant face recognition. You can just take a picture of like a plant you see and instantly get feedback on what that plant is. That's an amazing revolutionary technology, let there be no doubt. But that's because someone has actually already looked at that plant with their eyes and thought about it and then put that stuff on the internet for the algorithms to be able to access. So you still have to do the heavy lifting of looking, and then that's kind of where science begins. But the rest of that process is then kind of like a dissemination and talking about that work with colleagues and people arguing about, is it innate or is it learned? If it's innate, what are the genes for it? If it's learned, what are the experiences and mechanisms that led to it being learned? And, Is it rare? Is it this, N of one unique snowflake? Or does it happen every day in every animal? And that would give you the ability to kind of make it kind of more routine and really kind of document the likelihood, and then think about kind of where these specific behaviors come from the experiences the animals had in the past. So they're becoming more useful, for sure. And I think most people in my lab have had the experience of training a network to do something, realizing it's making a lot of errors, going back to training it. And by the time you've sort of validated the network and really have something useful, you've already looked at all the data yourself anyway and analyzed it. So now the trained neural network that you have is more or less like a gift for the new person coming on in, except that new people coming on in want to work on different kinds of things anyway. So that's just, science is not engineering, right? We're interested, can you even build such a thing as a bridge? Not like, how do you build a really good bridge that never breaks, right? So scientists, by nature, if you've done something that's almost sort of repellent, it's now time to go do something even more new, right?
Well, something that I don't think it was during this podcast, but something that you had mentioned earlier in the day was how oftentimes we don't know what we're even looking for to begin with, and that makes these tools useful. You can collect all the data in the world, but unless you actually have a question or something driving the use of that data, it's just going to sit there, right? So all this stuff feels like it comes down to an issue of kind of harken back a little bit to scale and resolution and precision. What do you lose by getting deep into the data and looking at individual neurons? Well, what if you back up and look at the whole network? You've lost your individual neuron, but you gain the network. Well, what if you back out and look at the whole organism? You've lost the individual networks and all those systems, but now you have, like what you're talking about, some sort of behavior that's expressed that we can sit there and monitor. Okay, well, if you're just looking at the moment, then you've lost the context of that animal's life. So what if you back out to 10 days of life? And it's, I guess, about what does your question tell you about the battle that you have to pick? And then if you're only one lab, you should back out and look at multiple labs, and where do they kind of meet in the middle? And that's been the most fun thing for me, and kind of listening to this and also being involved with other collaborative projects, is that you have to incorporate information at every scale, not just in terms of the animal, but in our collective learning and understanding. And that's what makes it interesting. I know for me, just the fact that this all stems from one compound that's called oxytocin. But it's all scale.
Oh, for sure. So, there is much more to brains and behavior and maternity and paternity than oxytocin. Oxytocin just gives us some nice inroads that allows us then to kind of construct bigger models, more complex models, thinking about oxytocin and estrogens, oxytocin in different brain areas, sexual dimorphisms and roles for sort of, different neurochemicals for different behaviors. In terms of the scale question, there's a project called Databrary, which has been really inspiring for us. Databrary is basically YouTube, but for videos, research videos of family life. So I've got a colleague at NYU, Karen Adolph, who is a developmental psychologist. Her laboratory is basically, it looks like a little kid gymnasium. And she has kids come in and they play with blocks. They try to stack them. She just has them walk to the edge of a mat. She has them walk up a ramp. And she's interested in, how do kids build a model of the world? How do they build their physics model? What kind of errors are required to make that model? But importantly also, I've taken my kids into her lab for this. I'm in the video also. And am I sitting there just on my phone, checking my email? I'm not. I'm actually I'm the nervous parent. I'm watching. I'm saying, yeah, good job, buddy. How much is that involved in children walking? There's no one true path. Just like there are a lot of ways to screw it up. There are a lot of ways to be a wonderful parent. And, you can be maybe giving too much support. Do you learn to ride a bike by me never letting go? Or do you learn to ride a bike by me never touching? And you just have to figure it out all on your own. Every parent's different. Every child, every dyad is different. And I think really effective parenting is just like effective teaching. You have to kind of understand the state of the person you're working with and adopt your own behavior to the needs of this individual. So Databrary is some of that. Databrary is also, her students have gone into the homes of different families and like made a video of dinner time. Now that's a really rich data set. 2 hours of dinner time. You've got spoken language, you've got gestural language, you might have song, you've got, the norms of dinner time of a particular culture. There are multiple labs who are interested in different aspects of those data. And I don't want to have grad student after grad student coming to my home. Oh, this one's interested in like, do we do anything bilingual? Oh, this one's interested in like, how often is soup on the menu, right? You want one clean data set. Some people are interested in spoken language, so you want good audio. Some people are interested in gesture, so you want capture of body position and everything. And so about 100 labs, this was about maybe 15 years ago or so, 100 labs around the world who were interested in developmental psychology came together to build this YouTube for research videos from an amazing archive. The point being, if we get one good, useful video, lots of labs will be able to extract what they need from it, because video really is this kind of special medium. And so I think that is one of the important things here, right? That like, I might have the specific questions I'm interested in. How are the needs of the child indicated? What kind of signals does the infant make? How are adults responding to those? What are the physical properties of the acoustics? What are the neural structures that respond and amplify those? When is that aversive? When is that attractive? What does that do? But that's just a very rarefied little niche problem that I'm interested in. There are other people who might be interested in the development of foraging algorithms. And so this video we have of this juvenile mouse copying the behavior of the mother mouse foraging. I mean, that's not connected to my research program at all, but there are definitely people who are interested in exactly that. In fact, that's why we even discovered this. I've got a colleague who studies foraging, knows that we just happened to be recording for the first 20 days of a mouse's life. And he's like, hey, can you just look through the video and just see, do you see anything like the emergence of leaving the nest, exploring on your own, foraging with another animal? And it's there to be shared, right? So again, right, like the infrastructure for housing that is something you then have to build. But once it's in place, lots of different labs can kind of benefit from that.
So all of this is developing this incredible, detailed understanding of life as a mouse. And I'm sort of wondering, we're really interested in life as humans. Why do we need to know about the life of a mouse? If it is not so that we can learn the brain mechanisms that underlie that. Yeah. So how can we go the next step? I mean, it sounds like we could go a long time not studying brain mechanisms at all, but just studying the life of a mouse. And to me, that'd be a little bit dissatisfying. I guess I'd rather watch the life of a whale.
So I think as a scientist, it's important to have both things in your mind and make a decision. And you don't have to fully commit to one way or another forever. But any particular project could be in one direction or another. And these two directions are the beauty and wonder of the natural world versus improving mental and physical health for us as humans. Humans care about humans. Members of your audience might love poems written by ChatGPT. I'm not that into it. I'm much more interested in what humans do because I'm a human. I mean, if a cow or an elephant paints a painting, that's cool, that's neat. There's a recent paper on a cow who learned to use a back scratcher in current biology, which is a wonderful piece of work. But I'm also interested in the humans who made a decision to write that paper and sort of like, the personal aspects there. So we care about both things, right? I watch a lot of nature specials, and I can appreciate them as things unto themselves. I'm curious and interested in the natural world. And that intersects with my interest in being a member of that world and being part of a marvelous, amazing species that has a lot of problems. And, the point of being a human on this planet is to make the world a better place for the world, but also for other humans. So I mean, that's why I work on neuroplasticity and prosocial behavior and parenting. And so I think it's important to try to strike a balance between those two things. So most biomedical research outside neuroscience studies, for example, tumor formation and progression, disease propagation, immune mechanisms, almost entirely in mice. We've cured some cancers. I mean, cancer biology is actually a very mature field right now that has made amazing breakthroughs. 50 years ago, the idea, if you put in your med school application, you wanted to cure cancer, that was thought to be like a laughable thing. Nobody said, I'm going to cure cancer. That just means you're not well, you don't understand the culture at the time. Now there are cancers we can treat and cure. Amazing, right? Neuroscience is a very early field relative to other aspects of science, physics, chemistry, even cancer biology. So I think we have to care about quality of life of different species to understand the consequences of cures and treatments and disease states. Because ultimately, I think, as physicians, one's interested in improving quality of life, right? And so regardless as to the presence or absence of biomarkers, like if my ankle hurts, I just want my pain to go away. I don't necessarily care what biomarkers there are. I just, the physician should be treating the state of the person, right? And so is there such a thing of animal quality of life? And where this gets really complicated is psychiatry, because that's sort of really about internal state. We just don't have a good understanding of the statistics of life of most species outside humans. The DSM-5 is more or less a consensus statement by the community as to what are psychiatric disorders. That wasn't sort of handed down. That's just sort of a consensus statement. That's why it's the DSM-5, not the DSM-4. It's much easier, more straightforward to work on neural computations, representations, disruptions of those things in animals like a mouse, where you can kind of literally get under the hood and leverage the tools of neuroscience to manipulate, to record, to understand the dynamics, and relate that to a mutation in this or that gene. So, I mean, there will forever be, I think, a place and a real need for animal research, in vivo animal research, in the hopes of treating these conditions. I mean, Alzheimer's and autism, we're struggling to even diagnose these, let alone treat them. I don't think that means we should back away because they're hard problems. If anything, we should kind of double down because they just require that much more investment, right?
Can I ask you the last question? I know maybe we're running out of time, but I know that you are synaptic plasticity physiologist. What is your angle on parenting and synaptic plasticity?
That's an easy one. That shouldn't take much time.
I mean, that's why I started working on parenting before I was a parent. And my interest really was, is there some behavioral system where I could relate changes in the brain to changes in perception and behavior? It just seemed like parenting was the cleanest thing to work on. Because like I said, what a chair is or how you learn to move an object around just takes so much interaction. And it's not clear where that even begins. Where do animals begin to build their physics model from the day they're born? But also, animals become parents from the day their kids are born. There's a clear kind of time zero which that occurs. And we knew from a lot of work from, major people in the field, Gunter Ehret, Robert Liu, that there were changes in certain parts of the brain that led to specific, behavioral responses. It just seemed like a good inroad for trying to understand what is neuroplasticity? How can we really document where and when it occurs in the hopes of leveraging it to help people get better at the things people need to do? I've got another line of work in my lab on cochlear implants. Cochlear implants are amazing devices that restore hearing to people who are deaf, but they don't work perfectly in most people, and some people they don't work at all. So here's this new electrical sense that they're getting from the world that their brains are having trouble interpreting it. This is a major surgical operation that they're now going to have, they have hardware in their head for the rest of their lives. Could a little bit of neuroplasticity go a long way in helping them suddenly make sense of the world? One of the joys of my life these days is teaching my kid math, teaching my 8-year-old how to do like arithmetic and long division. And you can see these sorts of one-shot moments where he's been struggling with something, and all of a sudden, boom, he gets it, right? And it's figuring out exactly like what it took to get him there and what the insight was that unlocked the problem. And that there's an active process, which is more or less getting to the right space getting to the right place in the overall space where that boom, eureka moment can happen. And similarly, that was my experience of learning how to change a diaper. I had no interest in this, and then boom, I kind of like had to learn it real quick, and there you go. So my interest was and always has been the amazing capacity for brains to change. Honestly, until we had kids, I thought like one of the most remarkable things in the natural world is neuroplasticity. We can have nominally the same genes and the same biological patterning, and yet we have such different, experiences or interpretations of the same stimulus. That's marvelous. That makes life, right? But then...
One thing, but the thing that is intriguing me a lot, that you say that moving an object is very complicated. You never ask this question to your mom when you start parenting, because they will tell you that it's a lifetime experience,
Oh, sure. Totally.
You see how many, time you have to change and learn new thing in order to teach that.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Robert.
Yeah, thank you. This has been fun.
A cool, long conversation. Alfonso, John,
Hey.
Alicia.
Yep.
This has been Neuroscientists Talk Shop.